Gather is a weekly pause created by Black women for Black women in a world that was never built for us to slow down.
This is where the capes come off, the masks come down, and we talk honestly about the grind, the conditioning, and what it really takes to come back to ourselves.
We tend to our healing, unlearn survival, and remind ourselves that ease, alignment, and self trust aren't luxuries, they're our birthright.
Sis, pull up a chair and gather with us.
Take a breath. We're here together.
Let the noise fall away.
Leave the cape at the door.
This
This pause
pause
is
is
sacred, and
and
so
so
are
are
you.
you.
Sis, gather around. I'm Dr. Sharonda, and this is Gather, a sacred pause created for Black women to pour back into themselves, release the weight of the week, and tend to what really matters. Here we unlearn survival and reclaim the ease, alignment, and self trust always meant for us. So get comfortable, lean in, and stay with me because shift happens when we gather together. Now, if you've been a part of the Gather fam for a while, you know that before we jump into the meat of the conversation, we always start by taking a moment to ground ourselves with intention and set the tone for our sacred time together. Today feels especially important because this is my first solo episode. And since I've been talking all week about us gathering for this Superwoman Cape retirement party, it felt only right to be fully transparent about why this conversation matters so much to me personally. Over the last 18 months, life has thrown some real curveballs my way. There's been grief, unexpected pivots, and moments that forced me to do an honest capacity check in ways I hadn't before. And what became clear is that I couldn't keep navigating real life while still trying to be a superwoman through it all. And anyone who knows me knows that I practice what I preach. And this season has required me to live these lessons and not just teach them. I know this season has been emotionally, physically, and spiritually challenging, but I also know it would have been a lot worse if I was wearing the cape of my conditioning. So today's intention is to talk openly about what it's looked like for me to retire the Superwoman cape, not because I couldn't do it anymore, but because continuing to wear it was costing me more than it was given. My hope is that in my honesty, someone listening feels permission to loosen their own cape and choose self-love in real time. So before we go any further, I want to pause right here because last week gave me a real reminder of what this work looks like in real time. I took my own capacity check and realized that pushing through and recording was actually not aligned with what I needed or what I wanted for that week. So instead of forcing it, I gave myself grace and chose to be present with my mom and our family as we celebrated her birthday. And what I noticed is that this week, taking that pause gave me enough capacity to show up in a way that feels grounded, aligned, and intentional. Am I back to 100%? No. But this season is less about perfection and more about presence. This week, I've been leaning more intentionally into my support system. I've been checking my capacity more frequently because the truth is, life is still lifing. It didn't magically slow down. But what has shifted is how I'm responding to it. I'm paying attention sooner, I'm asking for help faster, and I'm being more honest with myself about when something is too much before my body has to force the issue. And that's really what retiring the Superwoman cape looks like in real life. Not avoiding responsibility or pretending everything is okay, but being more mindful of yourself in the process. So, as we settle into today's conversation, I want to invite you to do a warm check in with me. Where have you been pushing through, even though your body or spirit has been asking for something different? And what might it look like to pause? not because you've earned it, but simply because you're human. So, sis, now if retiring this Superwoman cape were as simple as taking off a piece of fabric, this would be easy. But the fact is, this cape isn't fabric, it's conditioning. It's really made up of all of the thoughts you've learned, the beliefs you picked up along the way, and the behaviors that helped you survive all the things that life put in front of you. And for many of us, those patterns didn't ask for permission to stick around. They just kept showing up automatically, right? Without us ever stopping to ask if there was a different way to move through life. And so that's why retiring the cape often feels uncomfortable and damn near impossible at times. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because to truly retire the cape, you have to question everything that you thought has kept you safe. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Anything that you aren't willing to question is actually conditioning you. And so before we talk about letting the cape go, we have to learn how we first start to wear it to begin with. Most of us didn't wake up and choose to be Superwoman. The fact is, it was modeled for us a lot of the times. We've watched women push through their exhaustion. We've learned early on that being dependable, capable, and responsible often was rewarded. And so a lot of times we learn these things by watching all the other women around us struggle through exhaustion. And so maybe your perfectionism is related to that. Maybe you haven't asked for help because you didn't trust that things or people would show up and be there for you. Maybe in your household, it was found that keeping the peace mattered more than saying how you really felt. And so a lot of times that shows up as us striving, overextending ourselves, always feeling we have to prove something. A lot of times we often handle everything on our own. We do the most to avoid conflict or push our emotions to the side just to keep going. And none of these patterns mean that there's something wrong with you. They actually just suggest that there's things that have happened in your life that made it feel necessary to show up in that way. And so that's why this is challenging because these patterns will continue to show up on autopilot until you make a conscious and intentional choice to unlearn them and say that for me, putting down the cape is actually an act of self love and a way to prove that I'm actually human. And here's the part we don't talk about enough. These survival patterns can look really good from the outside. They get praise, they help us accomplish all of our goals, they often get labeled as us being strong, right? But just because something helped us survive doesn't mean it didn't come with a cost. Over time, constantly pushing, holding it together, and carrying everything alone starts to disconnect us from our bodies, from our emotions, and sometimes from the very people we're trying to be strong for. And for me, the moment that I knew I had to put that cape down came about 18 months ago when one of my close friends took his own life unexpectedly. As a psychiatrist, I wasn't unfamiliar with suicide or the impact it leaves behind. I've sat with children who have lost parents, women who have lost life partners, mothers who have lost children, and people who've questioned whether their own life was worth living. But none of that prepares you for the kind of grief that comes from losing someone you've been living life with on your own. And so for me, I knew I wasn't going to be able to just push through this. This wasn't something that I could just explain away. The cape wasn't going to help me here. And so it was at that moment that I knew I had to set it down once and for all. The week after my friend's death, I was scheduled to meet with my supervisor for my performance review. And I knew in that moment that I wasn't going to be able to continue to work in this way. And so I told my supervisor that I would be resigning by the end of 2024. And so in 2025, I sat down and rested intentionally on purpose. It was not about checking out, it was actually about me checking into myself and becoming more aware of what was going on in my own emotions. Because the reality is, I've struggled myself for years with anxiety and high functioning depression. And I didn't want myself to be at risk for something so concerning. So taking that pause in 2025 was also about me caring for myself in a way that I had never allowed myself to care about myself before. And so I had spent all of that year checking into my emotions, unlearning my conditioning, and really being mindful that overriding myself and being strong was just not what I needed to do in that moment. And at the time, I had no idea just how crucial that season of intentional rest and unlearning would be. I thought I was simply giving myself space to grieve, to understand my own emotions, and to create more ease and alignment in my life. I didn't realize I was actually rebuilding my own capacity. A few weeks shy of the anniversary of my friend's death, I was met with another unexpected curveball. My mom was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. And this has been an incredibly challenging season, not only for my mom, but for me and my entire family. Watching the strongest woman I've known fight for her life has been devastating in ways that I don't have words for. There's something deeply unsettling about seeing strength look fragile. I've seen my mom, who has spent her whole life being capable, dependable, and strong, come face to face with limits she didn't choose. And I've watched how hard it's been for her to confront her own hyper independence and lifelong conditioning in the middle of crisis. And that's really the part we don't prepare people for. Unlearning is hard enough when life is calm. Trying to do it when everything feels urgent, when fear, uncertainty, and grief are present, is something else entirely. And what this season has shown me in real time is why it matters to begin challenging our conditioning now. Because life rarely gives you warning when a curveball is coming. When crisis hits, it doesn't pause to give you space to rethink how you've learned to cope. The patterns you've relied on don't disappear, they get louder. The cape gets tighter. And so, again, that's the reason we're showing up today to have this conversation. And so, after sitting with all of that, I want to gently shift us here, not to move past the heaviness, but to give us something grounded to hold on to. And this is really where the gather framework becomes more than just a concept. It becomes a practice because retiring the Superwoman cape isn't a one and done decision. It's something we have to return to again and again and again, especially on the days when life feels the heaviest. And so I want to walk us through the gather framework with that in mind. And so if you recall, our G in gather stands for ground. And grounding is where we set intention, but also pair that with awareness. And so, one thing you can do is to set the intention that today is going to be a day that you decide to loosen the cape. When you hold that intention, you begin to notice when the cape shows up. You get to notice when you're about to just push through and override yourself or say yes without checking your capacity. This is about noticing, not about fixing. It's really about trying to catch things sooner and giving yourself a choice to do something different. Okay. And so once we ground ourselves with the intention for the day, we want to start to acknowledge when you do actually notice those patterns showing up, right? So, like if your perfectionism shows up, or if you see yourself not asking for help, you want to acknowledge that showing up and recognize that that's not who you are, that is your conditioning. And so acknowledgement isn't about judgment, it's about honesty. Because the reality is you can't change things you aren't able to name. Okay. And so our T is for tell the truth. And this comes with telling the truth to yourself first, the truth about what you're feeling, the truth about what you might need at any particular moment, the truth about when something is too much. And this isn't about the filtered truth, the Snapchat truth, that what you put on social media, but the honest truth that you tell yourself, because that's what it takes to be able to release the cape. And so H is where we hold ourselves with care. And so holding yourself with compassion looks like not being critical of yourself when you do find yourself picking up the cape. So we don't want to beat ourselves up when you fall into an old pattern, but that is an opportunity for you to get curious with yourself and be compassionate that you're learning this. And so it's going to take some time to get it. And so our E is embody what heals. And so that doesn't really take a big overhaul. It's really those small, real choices that we make in real time. It's the resting when you can, asking for help, allowing your good to be enough instead of requiring it to be perfect. And so healing shows up in how you respond, not in how much you endure. And the best part, the R, is reclaiming beyond survival. And so we don't want to be Superwoman. We want to be human. We don't want to feel like we have to be strong all the time, right? And so you are allowed to need your needs to be met by others. You're allowed to rest. You're allowed to receive help and support. And that's really what retiring the cape makes space for. This isn't something you master, it's something you practice one day, one moment, one choice at a time. So, after walking through all of that, I want to bring us back to something simple because the Gather framework gives us language and practice, but the real shift happens in what we choose to believe moving forward. So, let's take a moment here to reframe and then reclaim what was always meant to be ours. And so our reframe for this week is I am allowed to redefine strength in a way that honors my humanity, not just my resilience. And the second reframe is self love is not something that I earn after I've done enough. It's something that I practice when life is asking more of me than usual. And when we reframe that and shift the narrative, we're able to reclaim this that as an act of self love, I choose to loosen the Superwoman cape, even when it feels uncomfortable, unfamiliar, or unfinished. I choose to include myself in the care I so freely give to others. And so you can repeat this every day this week. As an act of self love, I choose to stop proving my worth through exhaustion. So, as we move into March, I want to invite you to hold one simple question with you this week. What would it look like to treat retiring the cape as an act of self love? So, if you were with us in February and participated in our self love practices, think of this as an extension of that work. So, maybe you wrote a love letter to yourself. Maybe you practice small acts of self love. Maybe you simply started paying attention to where you've been abandoning yourself. And don't worry, if you didn't get a chance to do any of that, this is still a perfect place to begin. Self love doesn't have an expiration date, and it doesn't require you to start perfectly. So let's commit to this being a month about continuing the conversation with yourself, not just pushing harder, just noticing more. Because sometimes self love looks like choosing ease in the middle of real life. And so before we close, I want to gently widen the lens because loosening the cape doesn't just change how we show up for ourselves, it actually quietly shapes what the people around us learn about strength and care. Legacy isn't just about what we leave behind, it's about what we model right now. And so when you loosen the cape, you show the people around you that strength can include rest, honesty, and care. And sometimes the most powerful legacy we leave is simply giving others permission to be human too. So, as we bring our celebration to an end, I want to name this because practicing what I preach also means being honest about capacity. And so, there may be moments with everything on my plate that I shift the frequency of episodes so I can continue showing up grounded, present, and aligned rather than just pushing through out of habit or expectation. So I will always keep you posted and I'll always meet you here with intention. So if this episode resonated, I'd love to hear from you. I'd also love for you to share it with someone who might need permission to loosen the cape themselves. So join me in the comment section and let me know what you're practicing right now and what takeaways resonated with you the most. And so my final takeaway to you is that it is my heart's desire that you have the courage to notice when the cape shows up, the grace to loosen it when you can, and the compassion to keep practicing even when it's hard. Thank you, thank you, thank you for choosing to gather in this space, to pause, and to tend to what matters. Until next time, remember, shift happens when we gather together. Thank you for taking this sacred pause with us today.
May you leave here with more clarity than you came with, and the courage to live what you now know.
Take what resonated, practice it gently, and let it shape the life you're building on purpose.
And remember, shift happens when we gather together.
Until next time, keep choosing you.